Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
My name is Ben Harris. I'm a 42-year-old manager at a construction firm in Los Angeles. I met my wife, Kathy, 12 years ago when she was 21, working as a file clerk just outside my office. What caught my attention first were the tight jeans she wore that hugged her hips perfectly. She was young, attractive, and left quite an impression. At the time, I had been divorced from my first wife for about 4 years and had no children. I always wanted kids, though, and with Kathy working nearby and handling the project files, it felt like things just fell into place. We started having lunch together, and after a few weeks, I invited her to spend the weekend with me. It was a great weekend. Good company, good chemistry, and we started dating seriously after that. A couple of months passed before Kathy told me she was pregnant. I was excited but also direct. I asked her if she wanted an abortion or if she wanted to get married. She didn't want an abortion, so the next weekend, we had a small, private wedding. I was thrilled. At 30, I felt ready to start a family, to be a dad, and I wanted to be young enough to enjoy every part of my kids' lives. But something shifted in Kathy after that. She became quiet, withdrawn, and pregnancy was not something she enjoyed. At the time, I thought maybe it was just the strain of carrying a child, but I later realized it was more than that. Kathy had married me not because she wanted to build a family, but to escape her mother's house. She had no real interest in having children and had even aborted 2 pregnancies from a previous relationship. That was something I didn't learn until much later. About 3 months before the birth of our first son, Kathy quit her job to become a full-time homemaker and prepare for motherhood. Our second and third sons arrived shortly after, and within 3.5 years, we had 3 healthy, energetic boys. With 3 young kids to look after, Kathy was constantly busy and often exhausted by the time I got home from work. I truly appreciated her dedication as a mom, but as her energy for parenting increased, her desire for intimacy seemed to fade. The gradual decline in our physical relationship left me feeling a bit on edge. I noticed that Kathy's attitude began to change when she turned 30. The kids were now all in grade school, and I had assumed Kathy would be able to relax a bit more and pay more attention to me. Unfortunately, our sex life continued to remain at a low ebb. I never really knew what Kathy was doing during the day with the kids in school. I looked back at what my mom used to do: cleaning the house, doing the laundry, shopping for food and the kids' clothes, taking the kids to soccer practice. I assumed Kathy's day would be pretty much the same as what I had seen my mom do. One day, Kathy approached me after dinner and told me she would like to find a part-time job. She said she was getting bored staying at home by herself during the day. I was a little concerned because I didn't see how she could make lunches, get the kids off to school, clean house, do the laundry, take the kids to soccer practice, go shopping, and still find the time for a job. I was worried that her health may suffer from plain exhaustion. Kathy spent a few weeks looking, and then by word of mouth found a part-time job as a bookkeeper for a small local gym. She told me that she would be given a free membership and would only work from 8 a.m. until noon. This would allow her to get the kids off to school and come home after work to do the necessary chores before the kids got home. She told me that if there was ever an emergency at school, the school could reach her at work, and she would only be 10 minutes away. Kathy's appeared to have thought this out carefully, and I could find no flaw in her logic. So I told her, go for it. Kathy started work and seemed to get an emotional lift from having to interface with adults at work. Things seemed to settle into a well-established routine, and Kathy's demeanor substantially improved. A few months after she started work, Kathy approached me with a request to take advantage of the gym's free membership. She wanted to go to the gym early in the morning from 4:30 a.m. to 6 a.m. to exercise, then come back home to get the kids off to school, and then head off to work at 8 a.m. Because of my commute, I had to leave the house at 6:30 a.m., so I really didn't see any conflict with the family's overall schedule. A few months went by and I began to notice Kathy getting her old figure back. She had dropped 20 pounds and was now carrying 120 pounds on her 5 feet minus 4 inches frame. When I complimented her on her efforts, she surprised me by telling me she felt her boobs were too small. She told me she wanted breast enhancements to make her boobs perky again. I realized after having 3 kids, she deserved the implants, especially if it would improve our stale sex life. Kathy got her implants, and it took her a couple of weeks to fully recover. Apparently, the surgeon inserted the implants through her armpits to make them look and feel more realistic. He did a very good job, and she was ecstatic with the results. Kathy again returned to her part-time job and early morning workouts. Things got back into the groove of everyday family life. But that was soon to change dramatically. It was early Saturday morning and I was cleaning out Kathy's car. As I took out the floor mat on the driver's side, I noticed a small cellophane bag underneath the car seat. I pulled out the small bag and noticed it was partially filled with white powder. I had no idea what was in the bag, but the possibility that the bag contained drugs crossed my mind. I began to get an uneasy feeling. Where would Kathy get drugs? Could the drugs belong to a friend? What in the hell was going on? What was Kathy doing during the day? I decided not to tell Kathy what I had found. I needed time to think things out and talk to an old friend who lived life walking on the fence. If the substance in the bag was a drug, my bud Timothy would know. That afternoon, I asked Kathy if she could take the kids to their soccer games because I needed to get an oil change for my car. I told her I would be back in a couple hours. I left the house and headed across town to Timothy's apartment. Just as I was about to knock on Timothy's door, the door opened and Timothy bent down to grab his newspaper. It had been a couple of years and Timothy was surprised to see me. I told him the kids, family life, and weekend soccer games was keeping me busy and chasing skirts with my old single buds was probably not practical. When he laughed, I told him I needed a favor. He told me, that's what friends are for. I entered his apartment and I showed him what I had found under Kathy's car seat. He opened the bag, wet his index finger, and tapped the white substance. He brought out a small amount on his fingertip, looked at it, and touched it to his tongue. Timothy casually said, "Meth?" I stood there stunned. What was Kathy doing with meth? And who had given it to her? I must have looked bewildered, for Timothy told me to sit down. Timothy saw the look in my face and asked me about Kathy. I told him she was working part-time as a bookkeeper at a local gym. He laughed and said, gyms were a haven for drugs. Steroids, meth, and cocaine were the usual suspects, and the most trainers wind up banging their housewife clients. It is very common. But he mentioned this may just be the tip of the iceberg of Kathy's shenanigans. I started to get a sinking feeling in my stomach. I think Timothy saw the blood drain from my face. Timothy looked at me and said, "You need to hire a PI. They will be discreet and are professionals. If you follow her and find her having sex with some guy, what are you going to do? Punch the guy out and get arrested for battery. And you may even lose the fight and give him a get-out-of-jail-free card to beat the hell out of you claiming self-defense? Punch her out and get arrested for felony spousal abuse? You're the one who would go to jail, and you're the one who would suffer as Big Bubas's bitch. All you would do is leave the door wide open for Kathy to continue her affair, and she would probably have the guy move into your home while you were in jail. When you got out, you would have nothing. California is a no-fault state, so her adultery would be ignored. But it gets worse. If you could not support her and your kids because you were incarcerated, the courts would take your 401k and retirement funds to use for spousal and child support. And remember, there is nothing to stop you wife from using those funds to support her lover. You would have effectively thrown away your life up to this point. When you are finally released from prison, you would carry the stigma of being an ex-con to every potential employer you contact. Unless you can start your own business, which is highly unlikely, you will be forced to take a job, if you can even find one, at a fraction of the pay of your current position. Timothy went on, "We have been friends for a long time, so I want you to hire a PI, and I want you to bring me all the information he finds. If she is taking drugs, you need to get her into a rehab facility for the sake of your children and the stability of their home. However, if she has committed adultery and you have done nothing to encourage that particular behavior, then she has lost respect for you and has disregarded the welfare of her children. If that is the case, you will never gain back her respect, and you need to take the kind of action that will allow you to walk away from this situation with your pride and your balls intact. No woman is ever sorry she cheated on her husband. She is only sorry that she got caught. A woman who is unfaithful fully intended her actions. She knew exactly what she is doing. It is a selfish act that totally disregards the feelings of her husband and family. And remember, the next time for her gets easier and easier. However, if she was drugged, then she was not cheating, but she was involuntarily assaulted." Timothy continued, "Women are different than men. From their late 20s to their late 30s, women's hormones are running wild. They are at the same runaway hormone level as an 18-year-old guy. Any woman who has been married for a few years and hits that cycle is looking for a new sex partner. Whether they successfully find it is another question. With the divorce rate in the Los Angeles basin at 65%, with 85% instigated by the wife, for first marriages and 80% for second marriages, and with an overall female infidelity rate of 50%, equates to a lot of wives screwing on their first and second husbands with no remorse. It appears that few women learn their lesson, but most continue their infidelity in subsequent marriages. Remember, not only does it get easier and easier, but the grass is always greener on the other side of the hill until you have to mow the lawn. Well, Ben, that is why I stayed single. I just saw too much in my line of work as a PI. With the divorce laws the way they are, men, in general, are fighting an uphill battle. And remember, Ben, it is a war to get the upper hand. Men don't marry partners. They marry adversaries and spend the rest of their lives suffering in silence. I left Timothy's apartment that afternoon shaken to the core. I took the business card of the PI Timothy handed me. I would call the PI Monday. I wasn't going to be emotional and mentally abused by anyone's runaway hormones. 2 weeks later, I stared in disbelief at the PI's report. Apparently, Kathy was meeting a trainer from the gym during her early morning workout. They had a routine worked out where they met at 4:30 a.m., spent a half hour screwing in the back of her car, and then went in for a workout when the gym opened at 5 a.m. It had never occurred to me to check what time the gym opened. I felt like an idiot. I had trusted her, and she had deceived me and the kids. I was not sad, nor was I heartbroken. I was experiencing ice-cold rage. The trainer turned out to be a small-time drug dealer who dealt in steroids and meth. I called Timothy and told him I would be stopping by with the PI's report. The drive through cross-town traffic was miserable. 45 minutes later, I was ringing Timothy's door. Timothy opened the door, invited me in, and motioned me to sit down. Timothy slowly digested the PI's report and gently handed it back to me. He told me to listen very carefully. First, Timothy said, you must not do anything that will make her suspicious. It is imperative that she does not suspect you know anything. This coming Monday, I want you to. I work early Monday around 4:15 a.m. Kathy was just getting out of the shower and went over to put on her gym shorts and top. I wondered if she was even wearing panties. Probably not. I lay in our bed pretending to be asleep. Once she went downstairs, I quietly got out of bed, slipped into my clothes and waited until I heard the garage door open. I heard the garage door close and I quickly went downstairs, put on my gloves, grabbed my camera with a telephoto lens, and went into the garage. I opened the truck to my car and pulled out Kathy's original plastic bag and 2 additional plastic bags of meth that Timothy had given me on my last visit. I took the bags and my camera, laid them on the passenger seat of my car, opened the garage and headed down the road towards Kathy's gym. As I approached the gym, I killed my lights and parked about 50 yards away from the gym's parking lot. I picked up my camera, the 3 bags of plastic, and exited the car. As I approached the parking lot under the cover of the bushes, I noticed Kathy's car parked a slot away from an older Ford Bronco. I couldn't see anyone in the Bronco, but I did notice some movement in the back seat of Kathy's car. I crept up to the Bronco and slowly opened the driver's door and tossed 2 of the plastic bags into the passenger's seat. I then kept low and snuck around the front of the Bronco and tossed the last plastic bag on the ground by the back seat of Kathy's car. I looked up and I could see Kathy's head by the far window. She getting pounded doggy style by a male I had never met. I assumed it was her trainer. I crept back out of the parking lot and went around the corner. I pulled out the untraceable cell phone I had purchased with 30 minutes of time and dialed 911. I gave the operator a fake name, the address of the gym, and told her that I was witnessing a rape and child abduction in progress. I told her the male suspect may be armed. I ran across the street and hid in the bushes poised with my camera and telephoto lens. In less than 3.5 minutes, 2 squad cars pulled up without their sirens and with their headlights off. Simultaneously, they drove into the parking lot and turned on their headlights on the 2 cars. The cops opened their squad car doors and stood behind them with their guns drawn. I could hear the cops through the bullhorn telling the occupants of the car to exit the vehicle now with their hands on top of their head. An unknown male emerged first wearing only his boxer shorts. Kathy, still topless, came out next wearing her gym shorts. Both occupants were told to turn around and place their hands against the car. 2 cops, under the cover of the other 2 cops, approached Kathy and her friend, grabbed their hands one at a time, and handcuffed their hands behind their back. I saw one cop bend down and pick up a plastic bag. He then showed it to the other cop and motioned for the other 2 backup cops to come over. 2 of the cops went over to the Bronco and opened both front doors. One cop came back holding 2 additional plastic bags. The cops conversed for a couple of minutes, ran a check on the license plates of the 2 cars, and checked the driver licenses they had found in Kathy's car and the Bronco. Although I didn't have much light, I was snapping pictures as fast as I could. I then saw the cops take Kathy and put her in the back seat of one squad car, and her friend went into the back seat of the other squad car. Then the squad cars drove away. I headed back to my car and drove home. When I got home, the kids were still asleep. 6 o'clock came around, so I woke the kids up to get them ready for school. At 7:30 a.m., I drove the kids to school. I thought to myself that I was doing a pretty good job as Mr. Mom. I drove home and called my boss to let him know I would not be coming in that day. About 11 a.m., I got a collect call from a sobbing Kathy telling me she needed to be bailed out of jail. She and her trainer had been arrested at the gym for possession of an illegal substance. I said I would find out what her bail was and see what I could do. She was crying as she hung up. I called my attorney and told him I wanted to file for divorce that week and to request supervised visits for Kathy. I also wanted him to obtain a restraining order against Kathy to stay away from the kids and not come within 100 yards of my home. Finally, I let out a sigh of relief. I walked over to my liquor cabinet, took out my bottle of Johnny Walker Blue Label, and poured about half my glass. I went into the living room and, as I looked at her smiling photo, I quietly said, "You filthy 304, you can rot in jail. You will never come back to my home." Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
I never thought I'd be writing something like this on Reddit, but here I am, spilling out 10 years of marriage like it's some kind of therapy session. You think you know someone, right? You trust them, build a life together, and then they turn around and throw something at you that makes you question everything. I guess I just never expected my wife to cheat on me, at least not in the way she did. It's funny, right? When you hear cheating, you picture something secret, something shady. Late-night texts, sneaking around, and whispered conversations behind closed doors. But no, Lisa, my wife of a decade, came right out with it, bold as brass, offering up the idea of an open relationship like she was doing me a favor. Seriously, is that normal? Am I the crazy one for thinking that's just wrong? I thought we were supposed to be partners, not whatever the hell that is. I'm not a writer or anything, so don't expect this to be some polished story. I'm just a regular guy, scrolling through Reddit like everyone else, and now I'm dumping my marriage problems on the internet because what else can I do? If I'm going through this, maybe someone else has, too. Maybe it'll help me make sense of it all if I lay it out here. So, let me introduce myself properly. My name's Mark. I'm 38, just your average guy. I've been married to Lisa, she's 35, for about 10 years now. We got together when we were younger, full of energy, and everything felt right back then. We had that spark, you know? The kind of chemistry that makes you feel like you've hit the jackpot. She was smart, funny, beautiful, everything I could ever want in a partner. And for a while, it was great. We were great. But 10 years is a long time. Life happens, people change, and things between us, well, they cooled off. I'm not gonna lie, we were tired of each other. It wasn't like we hated each other or anything, far from it. But when you live with someone for that long, share a bed, a bathroom, bills, groceries, and God knows what else, you lose that magic somewhere along the way. It becomes routine. And, yeah, the sex suffered. At first, I didn't think much of it. We were busy with work, life, and everything else. But months went by, and the bedroom was dead silent. And when we did try, it felt forced, like we were checking off some kind of marital duty. I'm not proud of it, but there were nights when I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was just how things were going to be from now on. I figured maybe we just needed help, you know, so I suggested Lisa see a psychologist. Maybe there was something going on that she wasn't telling me. Surprisingly, she agreed without much pushback. I thought, okay, maybe we're finally gonna work through this, but nope. Those therapy sessions did jack. If anything, things got weirder between us. I don't know if she was really talking in those sessions or just going through the motions, but whatever was going on in her head, it wasn't fixing our problems. In fact, everything took a nosedive right after she started hanging out with Amanda again. Now, Amanda, don't even get me started. I never liked her. She's one of those types who thinks she's got life all figured out because she's free-spirited or whatever. Every time she's around, I get that vibe like she's quietly judging our relationship, thinking she knows better. She's divorced, by the way, which isn't a surprise, considering the way she talks about marriage. To her, it's some outdated institution that people only do because they're too afraid to be alone. So, when Lisa started hanging out with her more and more, I knew something was up. I just didn't think it would lead to this. One night, after Lisa had spent the whole damn day with Amanda, she came home, and I could tell something was off. She had this weird look, like she was nervous but trying to cover it up with some fake confidence. That's when she sat me down on the couch, all serious-like, and hit me with it. "Mark," she said, "I've been thinking about our marriage." And you know, when someone starts a sentence like that, it's never going to end well. I could feel the knot in my stomach tighten up, but I tried to stay calm, hear her out. Then she said it. She actually suggested we open our marriage. My first thought was, is this some kind of sick joke? But no, she was dead serious. She said it like it was the most logical thing in the world, like she was offering up a new way to save us. According to her, it wasn't cheating because I'd know about it, because I'd know who she was with and where she was going. Like somehow that would make it all okay. She used words like freedom and trust as if that's what this was about. I sat there, just staring at her, trying to process what the hell she was saying. My wife, the woman I'd spent a decade with, was basically asking for permission to screw other people. How was that not cheating? How was that supposed to be some kind of solution to our problems? I couldn't wrap my head around it. It felt like a betrayal, like she'd already made up her mind and was just waiting for me to give her the green light. I tried to ask her why. Why now? Why this? She went on about how Amanda had helped her see things differently, how we were stuck in a rut, and this was a way out. It's not betrayal if you know about it, she said, like that somehow made it less painful. Like being told your wife wants to sleep with other men is supposed to hurt less if she's upfront about it. The whole conversation just collapsed. I was too pissed, too shocked to even think straight, and she was too convinced she was right. We didn't resolve anything. We didn't yell or scream, but the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Eventually, we both just got up and went to separate rooms, like strangers in our own home. She's probably in the other room right now, texting Amanda, getting more ideas about how to turn our marriage into some kind of open-door policy. So, after that night, after she dropped the whole open relationship bomb on me, things didn't just go back to normal. Of course, they didn't. I mean, how could they? Lisa seemed to think everything was settled, like I'd agreed to her ridiculous idea just by not storming out that night. The next few weeks were a blur of tension and awkward silences. She started going out more. And not just with Amanda. No, she was going on dates. Actual, real dates. With other guys. I don't know what the hell I was thinking letting it happen, but I guess I just froze. Part of me wanted to walk away, pack up, and be done with it. Another part of me, I don't know, was still in shock, trying to wrap my head around how we'd ended up here. She'd leave the house, dressed up more than I'd seen her in months, perfume thick in the air, and just go. Like this was the new normal. And every time she left, I felt a little more disgusted. I wanted to scream at her, at myself, but I couldn't even muster the energy. Instead, I stayed home, nursing a beer, stewing in my own frustration. The idea of leaving her was there, looming, but for some reason, I hadn't acted on it yet. Maybe it was the years together, the shared history, or maybe I was just being a coward, afraid to make the first move. One night, after she'd gone out yet again, I decided I couldn't just sit there anymore. I needed to talk to someone who wasn't going to feed me some feel-good crap about relationships. So, I texted my buddy, Sam. We've known each other since college, and he's the one guy I can count on to give it to me straight, no BS. We agreed to meet at our usual bar, one of those dive joints with sticky floors, a pool table in the back, and dim lighting. It wasn't fancy, but it was our spot. I walked in, spotting him at the bar already nursing a drink. Sam was the kind of guy who always had a half smirk on his face, like he knew something you didn't. He wasn't married, never really believed in it, so I wasn't sure how he'd take all this. I sat down next to him, ordered a whiskey, and let out a deep sigh. "What's going on, man?" "You look like shit," he said, without even glancing my way. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I just told him everything, how Lisa had dropped the open relationship bomb on me, how she was going on dates with other guys, and how I felt completely stuck. Sam listened, nodding here and there, his smirk slowly fading as the story unfolded. When I finally finished, he looked at me for a second, then said, "Man, you need to get the hell out of that marriage. She's walking all over you. Divorce her, take half of everything, and move on." I knew he'd say something like that. It's what I wanted to hear, honestly. But then he paused, took a sip of his drink, and added, "But, before you do that, why don't you make things a little interesting?" I raised an eyebrow, not sure what he meant. "You want to get back at her, right?" Sam leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "Well, you can't just roll over and let her have all the fun. Why don't you go out, pick up someone yourself, and bring her home tonight? Show Lisa what it feels like to be on the other side." I blinked, surprised at how casually he suggested it. "You mean, just bring a girl home? Like some kind of revenge?" He shrugged, that smirk creeping back onto his face. "Why not? She's already made it clear she doesn't give a damn about your marriage anymore. You want to leave? Fine, but before you go, make her feel what you've been feeling. She's out there, doing whatever the hell she wants, and you're just sitting at home like some kind of chump. Take advantage of the situation. Hit her where it hurts." At first, I shook my head. "I don't know, man. That feels wrong, like lowering myself to her level." Sam chuckled, finishing off his drink. "Wrong? Come on, Mark, what's wrong is letting her walk all over you while she's out banging other dudes. Look, you don't have to do anything crazy. Just go out, have some fun, and show her she's not the only one who can play this game." I sat there, swirling the whiskey in my glass, the idea bouncing around in my head. It was insane. Completely out of character for me. But at the same time, the thought of getting even, of seeing the look on her face when I walked in with another woman, that was tempting. Maybe Sam had a point. Why should I sit at home, feeling miserable, while she was out, exploring her freedom? If she wanted an open relationship, then maybe it was time to show her what that really looked like. I sighed, finally downing the rest of my drink. "All right, screw it. Let's do this." Sam grinned wide. "Now you're talking. Let's hit up the club and find you someone." We left the bar and headed downtown, straight to one of the nightclubs we used to hit up back in the day. It wasn't exactly my scene anymore, but tonight wasn't about that. It was about making a point, about taking back some control. The place was packed, the music loud, and the lights flashing in every direction. It felt like another world, far removed from the quiet misery of my marriage. Sam led the way, grabbing drinks and scanning the crowd like he was hunting for a prize. At first, I felt out of place, but after a couple of shots, I loosened up. I mean, why not, right? Lisa was out doing her thing. It was time I did mine. So, after Sam and I got to the club, things escalated quickly. The place was packed, bodies moving to the bass-heavy music, lights flashing in a haze of neon. I hadn't been to a club like this in years, and it felt like a different world, like I'd left all the crap with Lisa back home and stepped into a place where none of that mattered. I wasn't thinking about the past decade of marriage or her open relationship crap. All I wanted to do was forget, even if just for a night. Sam and I hit the bar first, knocking back a couple of shots. Tequila, whiskey, whatever was in front of us. It didn't take long for the alcohol to start working its magic. The frustration, the anger, the feeling of being played, they all started to melt away. And then, she walked in. She was stunning. I mean, the kind of woman you notice even in a crowded, dark, and sweaty club. Tall, brunette, a tight dress that hugged her curves just right. I watched her for a while, trying to find an excuse to approach her, but after a few more drinks, I didn't need one. I made my way through the crowd and leaned in with some half-sober line I don't even remember now. But it didn't matter. She smiled back at me, and that was all I needed. We started dancing. At first, it was just casual, like two strangers having fun. But the more we drank, the closer we got. Her hands were on my chest, my arms wrapped around her waist, and suddenly, it was like no one else in the club existed. Everything blurred together, the music, the lights, the people, and I didn't care about anything except being with her in that moment. Before I knew it, we were making out, and I was feeling more alive than I had in months. It was reckless, messy, but I didn't give a damn. She pulled me in closer, and I could feel the heat between us building. One thing led to another, and soon we were slipping away from the dance floor, weaving through the crowd toward the back of the club. We stumbled into the men's room, laughing like a couple of teenagers sneaking around. The second we were inside, she pushed me against the wall, kissing me hard, and I couldn't think about anything else. We didn't waste any time. I mean, we were in a freaking club bathroom. It wasn't exactly a place for romance. But it didn't matter. I was lost in the moment, in her, and we just went for it. Right there. When it was over, we stood there for a minute, catching our breath, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. She looked at me with a satisfied grin, fixing her hair in the mirror. And that's when something hit me, an idea that, in my drunk and angry state, seemed like the perfect way to get back at Lisa. I turned to her, leaning against the sink, and said, "You know, my wife just asked for an open relationship." Her eyes widened, and she raised an eyebrow. "Wait, you're married?" I nodded, smirking a little. "Yeah, but that's not the interesting part." She suggested we start seeing other people, and I didn't really give her an answer. "But now I've got an idea." She seemed intrigued, her interest piqued, though I could tell she was still processing the fact that I was married. "What's the idea?" she asked, crossing her arms, leaning against the counter like she wasn't sure whether to laugh or be curious. I took a deep breath, the alcohol giving me more confidence than I probably should have had. "Come back to my place. Let's have sex again, but this time, in front of her." For a second, she just stared at me like she wasn't sure if I was serious or completely insane. But then, to my surprise, a slow smile spread across her face. "You want to have sex with me, in front of your wife, to get back at her?" "Yeah," I said, feeling a rush of adrenaline just thinking about it. She's been going out, doing her own thing, and I'm supposed to be fine with it. So why not show her what it feels like? You're beautiful, and I'm sure she'd hate it. It's the perfect revenge. She laughed, shaking her head, clearly amused by the whole thing. Well, that's a first. I've never been asked to help someone get revenge on their wife before. I shrugged, grinning. There's a first time for everything, right? She thought about it for a moment, then downed the rest of her drink, her decision made. "All right, let's do it. Sounds like fun." And just like that, the plan was set. I didn't even think twice about what I was doing, about the consequences, or how this might blow up in my face. All I cared about was getting back at Lisa, making her feel the humiliation she'd been putting me through. We left the club together, heading back to my place. The whole way there, I kept imagining Lisa's face when she'd see us. Part of me couldn't believe I was actually doing this, but the other part, the angry, bitter part, wanted this more than anything. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about taking control of something in my life for once. And tonight, that control was going to be mine. We got home late, stumbling through the front door, the buzz of alcohol and adrenaline still pulsing through my veins. My heart was racing, not just from what had happened at the club, but from what was about to go down. The house was dark and quiet. Lisa was already asleep, or so I thought. I had no idea how the night would unfold, but I wasn't backing down now. The girl I'd met, her name was Julia, followed me inside. She had this confident look about her, like this whole situation was some kind of wild adventure for her. We didn't waste any time. We made our way to the living room, and without a second thought, we were on the couch, tangled up in each other again. My mind wasn't on anything else but that moment, fueled by anger, lust, and a deep desire for revenge. Then I heard it, a noise from upstairs. A door creaking open, footsteps. Lisa. She was coming down the stairs. At first, I thought maybe I could play it cool, pretend like nothing was going on. But when she reached the bottom of the stairs and saw us, her face said everything. She froze, her eyes wide with shock. I could see the horror, the disbelief in her expression, and for a split second, I almost felt bad. Almost. "What the hell is going on?" she shouted, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. I didn't stop. Neither of us did. Julia kept going, and I just stared at Lisa, feeling the rush of satisfaction wash over me. Lisa's face twisted in anger, and she took a step toward us, like she was going to try to physically pull us apart. But I raised my hand, palm out, stopping her dead in her tracks. "Free relationship," I said, my voice calm but dripping with sarcasm. "I'm sorry, but isn't this what you wanted?" Lisa's face went pale. Her mouth opened like she wanted to scream, but no sound came out at first. She looked like she was about to say something, but instead, she just stood there, staring at me with a mixture of rage and disbelief. For a moment, I thought she might actually hit me, but then she turned and stormed back upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind her. And that was it. The moment I'd been waiting for, the revenge I never thought I'd go through with, was happening right in front of me. The rest of the night was a blur of passion and intensity, unlike anything I'd felt in years. It was reckless, sure, but in that moment, it was everything I needed. Julia and I didn't stop. We continued, right there on the couch, no holds barred. It was insane, chaotic, probably the craziest night of my life. And somehow, it was also the best. When the sun started to creep through the blinds, I felt a weird sense of calm wash over me. Julia got dressed, gave me a playful smile, and handed me her phone number. "In case you ever need a repeat performance," she said with a wink before walking out the door, leaving me standing there in the living room. I looked at the number in my hand, and for the first time in weeks, I felt free. Like I'd finally taken back some control. But there was one last thing I needed to do. I walked upstairs to our bedroom, where Lisa had locked herself away all night. I opened the door to find her sitting on the bed, her eyes red from crying, her face hardened with anger and humiliation. She didn't even look at me as I stepped inside. I stood there for a moment, taking in the scene. This was the woman I'd spent a decade with, the woman I thought I'd grow old with. But now, looking at her, all I saw was someone I no longer recognized. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice steady and cold. Lisa didn't flinch. She didn't argue or plead. Instead, she just nodded, her lips tightening into a thin line. "Good," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm happy to agree to that." There was no fight left between us. No more words to say. I turned around and left the room without looking back, the weight of the last 10 years suddenly feeling lighter. It was over. And I couldn't have been more ready to start fresh. The next morning, after the storm that was the previous night, I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a hangover and trying to wrap my head around everything that had just happened. The divorce, the crazy revenge, the fact that I'd just blown up my life in the span of a few hours. But despite all that, one thing kept coming back to me, Julia. She had left her number, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. About her. I don't know why, but after staring at my phone for what felt like forever, I decided to dial her number. Maybe I needed to feel some kind of normalcy after everything that had gone down. Maybe I just needed to see her again, to talk without the madness of last night looming over us. I don't know. But I dialed, and she picked up after a couple of rings. "Hey, it's Mark," I said, suddenly feeling awkward as hell. "From last night." There was a brief pause, and I could almost hear the smirk in her voice. "Yeah, I remember," she said, sounding amused but also a little hesitant. "What's up?" I was wondering if you wanted to grab coffee or something," I said, running my hand through my hair. "You know, actually talk. Without, everything else." She laughed softly. "Coffee, huh? After last night? That's a bit of a change of pace." "Yeah, well," I muttered, feeling the embarrassment creeping in. "Last night was something else. Figured we could talk like normal people for a change." There was a moment of silence before she answered. "Okay. Coffee sounds good." We met up at a small cafe not too far from my place, somewhere neutral, where the insanity of the last 24 hours could feel distant, like it hadn't actually happened. When I saw her walk in, I couldn't help but feel a little weird about it all. I mean, we'd hooked up in a club bathroom and then had sex in front of my wife. That wasn't exactly a typical first encounter. But now, here we were, sitting across from each other, both of us a little awkward and unsure of what to say. At first, we didn't talk much. We were both kind of embarrassed, trying to avoid eye contact and pretending to care more about the coffee than the giant elephant in the room. Finally, Julia broke the silence. "So, that was an interesting night," she said, giving me a small, almost sheepish smile. I nodded, chuckling awkwardly. "Yeah, that's one way to put it. I'm not usually that guy, you know." "Neither am I," she said quickly, taking a sip of her coffee. "Honestly, I wasn't even supposed to be there. I just kind of ended up at the club by accident." "By accident?" I raised an eyebrow, curious now. She sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Yeah, my boyfriend, well, ex-boyfriend now, dumped me a few days ago. We'd been together for a while, and out of nowhere, he just tells me he's moving to a different city and doesn't want to do the whole long-distance thing. So I went to the club to blow off some steam, clear my head. And then, well, you know the rest. I wasn't expecting that. I guess I'd just assumed she was there for a good time, but hearing her story made me feel a bit guilty for what we'd done. It wasn't just a crazy night for her, it was an escape, something to distract her from her own pain. In a way, we were both trying to get away from the messes in our lives. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, genuinely meaning it. "That's rough. Breakups, they suck." She smiled a little at that, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah, they do." I wasn't sure how to steer the conversation from there, but I figured it was time to come clean about my side of things. "I told Lisa I'm filing for divorce," I said, watching her expression closely. Her eyes widened slightly. "Really? That was quick." "Yeah, I guess last night was the final straw," I said, running a hand through my hair again. I couldn't keep doing it anymore. She's been going out, seeing other guys. I don't know why I let it drag on as long as I did. But after what I did, I realized there's no going back. It's over. She nodded slowly, processing what I'd just told her. "That sounds complicated." "Yeah, that's one way to put it," I said, echoing her words from earlier. "It's a mess, honestly. We were together for 10 years, and then one day, she drops the open relationship thing on me like it's normal. I guess I should have seen the signs, but I didn't. And now, well, here we are." We sat in silence for a moment, both of us lost in our own thoughts. I didn't know what I expected from this coffee meeting, but I hadn't anticipated feeling this strange sense of connection to her. She wasn't just some random girl from the club anymore. She had her own story, her own pain, and somehow, we'd crossed paths at just the right, or wrong, moment. I could feel something growing inside me, some kind of sympathy, or maybe even something more, but I was too afraid to say it out loud. I didn't know how to navigate this. I didn't even know if I wanted to. Part of me was still in shock from everything that had happened, and the other part of me was scared to admit that I might actually want to see where this went with Julia. But I kept it to myself, sipping my coffee and stealing glances at her, wondering if she felt the same. The divorce process is almost over now, and I can't even begin to describe the relief I feel. It's like this huge weight I've been carrying around for years is finally lifting off my shoulders. Lisa and we were done long before she suggested the open relationship. I think I knew it deep down, but I was too stuck in the routine of it all to admit it. Now that it's nearly over, I can finally breathe again. I can finally focus on the things that actually matter, like building something real with someone new. Speaking of, Julia and I have gotten pretty close since that wild night. And by close, I mean we've been living together for a little while now. Yeah, I know it's fast, but sometimes things just happen that way. After everything that went down, it just felt right. We both came from places of hurt, both needed someone to lean on, and somehow we've ended up building something good out of all the chaos. It hasn't been all smooth sailing, though. Lisa, being the person she is, tried to mess things up for us. At first, she acted like she didn't care about the divorce, like she was glad to be rid of me. But when she found out I was with Julia, she went off the rails a bit. Tried to spread rumors about us, said some nasty things behind my back, even showed up at my place a couple of times, causing a scene. I think it finally hit her that I was moving on, and she couldn't handle it. But here's the thing, none of it worked. Julia didn't let Lisa's antics get to her, and honestly, neither did I. We're too solid for that kind of drama. I think that just made Lisa angrier. From what I've heard, she's been throwing herself into casual relationships, hopping from guy to guy, like she's trying to prove something. Every few weeks, there's a new guy on her arm. I get it, she's searching for something to fill the void. But the way she's going about it, I don't see it ending well for her. It's not my problem anymore, though. I'm out, and that's all that matters. Anyway, I wanted to thank all of you who've followed along with this story and supported me. It's been a crazy ride, and I didn't expect to find so much comfort in sharing all of this. Your comments, advice, and encouragement helped me get through some of the toughest moments of my life, and for that, I'm grateful. As for the future, I'm excited. Julia and I are in a good place, and for the first time in a long time, I'm actually looking forward to what comes next. That being said, I'm always open to advice. Life can be unpredictable, as I've learned all too well, so if anyone has any tips for navigating a fresh start after a messy divorce, I'm all ears. Thanks again, everyone. Here's to new beginnings, better relationships, and hopefully a drama-free future. Wish me luck. Update. It's been 2 years since my last update, and I thought it was time to check back in. A lot has changed since then, and for once, I can actually say things are going really well. Life's taken some unexpected turns, but this time, in the best possible way. First off, Julia and I got married about a year ago. It was a small, intimate ceremony, nothing over the top, just close friends and family. Honestly, after everything that happened with my previous marriage, it felt amazing to start fresh with someone who truly understands me. And here's the big news, we're expecting a daughter. She's due in a couple of months, and I'm already over the moon about it. I never thought I'd be this excited to become a dad, but here we are, getting ready to start a family. It feels surreal. On top of that, I've been keeping busy with a small business I started. I've always had a bit of an entrepreneurial itch, and after the divorce, I figured it was the perfect time to give it a shot. It's nothing huge, just a little home renovation company. We focus on kitchen and bathroom remodels, and I've got a small crew helping me out. Business is steady, and it's honestly been a great way to channel my energy into something productive. I love the hands-on work, and being my own boss has been more fulfilling than I ever imagined. Now, as for my ex, you all probably remember what I said a while back, that her lifestyle wasn't going to end well. Well, turns out, I was right. From what I've heard, Lisa's been dealing with some pretty serious consequences. Word around town is she caught something, a venereal disease that's tough to treat. It's not the kind of thing you wish on anyone, but it looks like all those casual relationships caught up with her. And there's been some bad rumors about her too, you know, the kind that spread fast in small towns. People talk, and from what I hear, it's not been easy for her. Don't get me wrong, I'm not celebrating her downfall or anything like that. I'm not the type to find joy in someone else's misery. But in a way, it feels like everyone ended up where they were supposed to. I got my fresh start, and she's dealing with the consequences of her choices. Life has a funny way of evening things out, I guess. Anyway, I just wanted to give a quick update and thank you all again for sticking with me through this crazy journey. Your support meant more than you know, and I appreciate everyone who took the time to listen and offer advice. Here's to the future and whatever it brings. Take care, and thanks for all the attention.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
I don't know how much longer I will survive my betrayal of my husband 5 years ago. I know there's a bullet coming with my name on it, but when, where, or how I don't know. I need to get this down on paper before it happens, so the whole world will know the cost of cheating I have to pay. Let me start from the beginning. It started the year my boys were on summer break from school, and I sent them to a very nice summer camp as we always did. Ron was 17 and Jerry was 16 at the time. My husband, Robert, was on a mission for the military to some South American country. He was a major and led a Green Beret A team and had been gone for 2 weeks already. I had just finished with 2 of my secret lovers from the local frat house and sent them on their way home. Another one would be here the next day and the day after that. Well, you get the picture. I had a young stud servicing me every weekday except Mondays when 2 brothers came together. It started 3 years ago when I was invited to go to a frat party with one of the football players that had been screwing me for a month. The word got out I had a thing for young men with large tools, and I had boys hitting on me all night. I know I consumed a lot of beer that night and was taken to a bedroom. I took on everyone that wanted a piece and gave it to them happily. By morning, I was one well-screwed woman. I don't know how many loads I took in all 3 holes, but I was leaking like a sieve. My hubby would be gone for another month at the time. I made arrangement with several of the guys to visit me while the boys were in school. That started a series of affairs that had gone on for 3 years already. My kids and husband never found out as I was so careful not to leave any clues. As I said, the 2 brothers had just left me, and I was headed for the shower when the doorbell rang. I answered it wearing a robe and nothing else underneath. There stood 2 captains I had never seen before, but they had the silver wings of a Green Beret on their chests. Mrs. Robert Johnson? Yes, that's me. I am Captain Mitchell, and this is Captain Rogers. It is with deep regret that Major Robert Johnson was killed this morning in a plane crash in South America. We don't have all the details, nor do we know if his body can be recovered at this time. The plane went down in hostile territory, and the entire team was lost. That was the last thing I remembered until I woke up later on the couch with my sister-in-law, Julie, wiping my face with a cold, damp hand towel. The 2 captains had picked me up off the floor and called her from the emergency contact card they had. They left when she got there, and my brother was on his way there from work. She got me up and gave me a glass of water, then took me to the shower. Listen, Robin, I don't want to know anything about what you have been doing, but judging by the amount of sperm running down your legs and the puddle on the floor where you collapsed, I'd say it was no good. I cleaned the puddle up, and now you better wash the rest away before my husband, your brother, gets here and sees it. If you weren't my sister-in-law, I'd call you a witch and a 304 right now and walk away from you. Now you have about 45 minutes before Elle gets here to clean up and get dressed like a decent woman should be. I'll be in the living room after I pour a cup of coffee. Now move, witch. I got my head together and showered and dressed quickly. My husband was killed while I cheating on him, and now my brother's wife knew about it, and quite possibly those 2 captains too. What was I going to tell the boys? Would Julie tell on me? My stomach lurched and I threw up in the bathroom sink. If anyone had seen those contents, there would be no doubt what I had been swallowing all morning. I rinsed it all down the drain and brushed my teeth and rinsed out everything. I looked in the mirror and saw my eyes were red and puffy from all the crying I was doing. Every time I thought about what I had been doing while my husband died, I would cry harder. Julie finally came and could tell the way my shoulders were heaving that I was racked with sobbing. She helped me back to my bed and sat me down while she dabbed my eyes with the tissue from the box on the nightstand. Robin, we'll help you get through this and help the boys too. When it done, you and I will have a sit-down girl-to-girl and heart-to-heart talk, and you will have to answer some very pointed questions. No lying or deceit from you will be accepted. I won't tell anyone what I saw today either. Thank you, Julie. I am feeling so bad right now. Why did this have to happen now? He only had 3 more years to retire and be with me forever after that. Maybe you are being punished by a higher power. Al is here, and he wants to make sure you are okay before he goes to the camp to get the boys. Don't worry about telling them. He'll break it to them gently and be there for them, then bring them home. Julie and I went out to the living room, and Al held me for a few minutes rubbing my back. He said he would be back with the boys in the morning. The camp was 12-hour round-trip drive, so watch for them in about 14 hours. As he was leaving, 2 women showed up and said they were from the base officers' wives club, and they came to see if I needed anything. They told me the military will handle all the funereal contacts and take care of everything for me. The base chaplain would be by tomorrow afternoon to talk to me and the boys. All I could do was nod to them. I was crying so hard I couldn't even talk. They sat with me while Julie changed the sheets and blankets on my bed and putting them in the washing machine. As the news spread like wildfire, friends dropped by to offer their condolences and made sure Julie had their phone numbers in case I needed anything. A colonel from base security stopped by to collect any records Robert may have had, but since he didn't bring anything home, there wasn't anything to collect. He offered his deepest sympathy and left. When everyone had gone for the night, Julie gave me a sleeping pill and put me to bed, and she slept out on the couch. I slept fitfully through the night. Even the pills didn't stop the nightmares. I awoke the next morning feeling like I had been run over by a runaway truck. By the end of the day, I wished I had been. Julie must have heard me stirring around and brought me a mug of coffee to help me wake up. She gave me another pill and said it was a low-grade sedative to help me get through the day. Her doctor prescribed them for me, and she ran and got them earlier this morning. She told me a Richard Martin had called and expressed his sympathies. I gasped as I remembered he was the frat president and was supposed to come today. Julie said he had heard about the death on the news this morning and canceled all my appointments until further notice. He was one of my first lovers 3 years ago and was still one of my weekly liaisons. This was to be his last year anyway, as he had graduated and would be leaving for law school soon. I would have to call him later when I was alone and thank him for everything. Julie made me eat breakfast, then a light lunch as the visitors came and went throughout the day. I came in with my boys. They looked like they had been crying for hours too. They ran and hugged me, and we cried together in a group hug. Al brought their gear in and had them go put it away in their rooms. Once again, the officers' wives club wives showed up with foodstuff already prepared so my visitors and family could have food and refreshments. One older woman told me she was Jerry Stockman, and I realized she was the commanding general's wife. She handed me a list of names, addresses, and phone numbers and said they were the wives of the team that was with my husband. Julie took the list from me and made floral arrangements with a local florist for delivery to the wives in my name and credit card with a note that I would call on them when I was able to. The rest of the day, the boys and I put up a brave front to all our visitors. The chaplain came by and said a mass memorial service was scheduled for Thursday afternoon for all the families. Individual services could be scheduled too whenever we wanted it. Since the bodies couldn't be recovered and it was doubtful they ever would be, only memorials were being planned. Al and Julie were the only family we had left, so a big private memorial service wasn't necessary for us. Each wife would receive the tri-folded flag before the 21-gun salute, and taps was played. The salute was being formed of all Green Berets, and they were all friends of my husband's. All were volunteers too. Finally, the visitors stopped and Julie fed me another sleeping pill and sent me to bed. The nightmares kept coming back all night. Wednesday was almost a repeat of Tuesday. By Thursday, I was a nervous wreck. I was still taking the sedatives and now antidepressants. We went to the memorial service, and it was beautiful. Julie led me around to the other widows so I could tell them how sorry I was with their loss as well and hear mine from them. We all got together for a group hug and crying jag after taps was over, each carrying our flag. We were all Green Berets' wives except the 2 pilots of the aircraft, but we welcomed them into our group hug as if they were. General Stockman came up to the group and told us a heavily armed body recovery team was being allowed in tomorrow morning by helicopters. The country's government approved the humanitarian effort for a search and recover effort. The 25-man team was already in the air on their way. We went home after that. Each widow was having an open house for friends and family that afternoon and evening. Julie prepared for mine on Friday. Al took me to each house so I could pay my respects for the men that served under Robert. I was on the last of my strength when we left the last home, and Al took me home. I thanked my brother for his help, and I cried on his big shoulders while he held me tightly. Julie fed me another sleeping pill, and I slept very well that night. No nightmares to haunt me. Friday morning came and I woke up feeling better than I had since I got the news. Julie gave me the antidepressants and another sedative just before the open house. One by one the other widows came in and paid their respects to me as I had done, and a couple stayed for quite a while, but most left soon afterwards. This was to be the last time I saw most of them as they separated to go to wherever their families were at. Such is the life of a military family. By Friday night I was mentally and physically exhausted, and another sleeping pill knocked me out. Saturday morning came, and after we all had breakfast the boys asked if I would take them to the gun range today. They used to go every Saturday when Robert was home to practice. Robert had taught them well. Al said he would drive us, so we went. They boys went to the still targets first and shot expert scores, then on to the moving targets. I kept hearing them mutter something before every shot, and I leaned in closer to hear what they were saying. Both boys were leaning into the rifles and saying, "Wait for it." Then when everything lined up, they would fire. I was surprised when I saw the targets. Almost every shot was a kill shot to the head. The range master told me these two were the best non-military shooters he had seen in a long time, and even then, they were better than most of the military shooters as well. Robert trained them well. Monday afternoon, General Stockman came to the house and told me the recovery team wasn't able to recover any bodies. The aircraft had literally exploded into a fireball in the air, and the fire consumed everything inside the plane. Whatever was left, the animals and insects finished. The only remains they found were semi-melted dog tags for all 11 men. Once again, I had his heartfelt sympathy. Julie sedated me into a deep sleep once again. The summer came and went. The boys returned to school. Ron is a senior and Jerry was a junior. Their fellow classmates gave them both a hearty welcome, and the school offered their sympathies as well, and life went on. Then the first disaster hit: college football. I was watching it on TV with the boys as the local college was playing a distant college, and there was my first lover on the field. He was running the ball toward the goalpost to score the winning touchdown. He crossed the line, and when he raised his arms in victory, his head exploded on national TV. We three sat there totally stunned as the channel went to a commercial real quick. It was all over the news for days. A sniper on the roof of a school building had fired the shot that killed my former lover. It became the talk of the town for weeks after that. No one had any idea who the shooter was or why he had been chosen as the victim. The police were stumped. The night of the shooting, Richard Martin called me from his new campus. He told me the new frat president called him and reported that Richard's journals had been stolen from the records hall. He told me the journals never mentioned my name in them, but every lover I had was listed with dates and times. The dead player's name was first on the list. I almost passed out when he told me there was a record kept, and I got dizzy when he told me the last part. It was 3 days later when the national news announced the death of Richard Martin as the result of a sniper shooting on his campus. He had been studying in his dorm room when the shot shattered the window and his head next. The shot came from a tree over half-mile away. No clues to the sniper were found. This time the police visited me as my name and phone number were on his Rolodex. They showed me a photograph of a letter he had gotten the day before, and all it said was, "Wait for it." When I came to, they asked what it meant. I told them that was what moving target shooters said as they waited for their target to line up with the crosshairs of their scopes. My husband had taught that to my sons, and they said it when they fired the kill shots at the range. The police LT told me that the same letter had been found at the football players' room. I went down again. Now the police were interested in me and my connection to the victims. I didn't tell them they were both lovers of mine, just that I knew them both from around town, and that seemed to placate them for now. Over the course of the next 2 years, my former lovers all died one by one at the hands of the sniper. The two brothers were the last to go. The police came to me every time, and they had all received that same message the day before: "Wait for it." At some point they found out that all the victims had been sleeping with me on a regular basis when my husband was out of town and kids were in school. Somehow the word got out, and the people in town started pulling away from me. Even my boys left home and wouldn't talk to me anymore. Julie came to check on me once in a while, but she didn't stay long either. Both boys joined the Army when they graduated high school and went to snipers training and applied to the Special Forces school. I wasn't invited to basic graduations and was told not to show up there either. I had to remove graffiti off my garage doors as someone painted 304 and witch on it several times. People in town looked at me and just sneered in disgust at me. Men kept hitting on me for a sex date when their wives weren't around. I hadn't taken a lover since the day my husband died and would never again either. I finally had to move a couple hours drive away where I wasn't known by anyone and only the boys. My brother and his wife knew where I lived now. I had attempted suicide twice and was seeing a therapist, taking antidepressants daily, and going to sex addiction group meetings. I was losing weight and looking very old now for a woman that was only 40. I looked 60. I didn't care anymore. I wanted to die. Al and Julie visited with me weekly and tried to snap me out of the funk I was in. Without my boys, I didn't have the will to live anymore. I was responsible for the deaths of 10 young men, and it ate at my very soul. Now on the anniversary of Robert's death, I am looking at the letter I got in today's mail. Those 3 haunting words: "Wait for it." I am waiting for it, and I am welcoming it when it comes. My will is written and at the lawyer's office. My burial expenses are paid off. I called Al and Julie when I got the letter and told them goodbye and asked them to ask my sons to forgive me please, and asked for theirs too. They both gave me theirs and I hung up the phone. I am sitting in front of a big picture window while typing this on my laptop. The curtains are open to the daylight and I am facing the window. I am making the headshot that is coming an easy one. As I sit here looking at the street wondering where the shot would come from, a military police car pulls up in my driveway with its red and blue lights flashing. I watch as 2 officers get out, and the first thing I see is the glare off the silver wings on their chests. Somehow, they look familiar to me, and as they came up to the door and walked in without knocking, I see it is my 2 sons. The military police car pulled out and left after the driver put their bags in the entryway. Both boys came to me and hugged and kissed me. I heard 3 shots ring out in the afternoon air, and both boys looked at me, and Ron told me it was over. The sniper was dead. They told me I was forgiven by them, and the Green Beret take care of their own. I don't know who the sniper was, and no one will ever tell me if it was Robert or not. I have my boys back, and that's all that matters now. Wait for it. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Story title: I exposed my wife's affair with her ex at our wedding reception, but then I discovered my mother-in-law was behind it all. The story begins with David and Emma, a couple deeply in love and excited for their wedding day. After months of planning, they are finally celebrating their union with family and friends. David feels that he has found his perfect partner in Emma, who he believes is equally devoted to him. The couple's family members are present, and while the day seems ideal, small moments hint that something might be amiss. Emma's mother, Patricia, seems to be overly involved in the wedding details, hovering around the couple and acting strangely possessive of Emma. David brushes this off as typical mother-of-the-bride nerves, not realizing her intentions. His sister Clara is present as well, and though supportive, she seems to notice something unusual about Emma's behavior. As the reception progresses, David remains blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. As the reception is in full swing, David's sister Clara pulls him aside, looking tense. She reveals that she has just received disturbing information, messages and photos from Emma's phone that suggest she has been having an affair with her ex, Alex. Clara, who had her suspicions about Emma's fidelity, had discreetly accessed Emma's phone during the day. What she found confirmed her worst fears. Emma had been in touch with Alex, exchanging intimate messages and even planning to meet up with him after the wedding. David feels his world shatter as he scrolls through the messages. The photos and texts make it clear that Emma never let go of her past relationship, and the affair has been ongoing. Overcome with disbelief, David struggles to process what he's seeing. His shock soon turns into a sense of betrayal and anger. Clara, who has always been protective of her brother, advises him to confront Emma then and there. Fueled by betrayal and raw emotion, David decides he cannot go on pretending everything is fine. He takes the microphone, and as guests quiet down, he announces that he has something to share. Holding back tears, he confronts Emma in front of everyone, revealing her messages and photos with Alex. Gasps ripple through the crowd as David shares how he had believed in her love and loyalty, only to discover her continued connection with her ex. Emma is left stunned, caught off guard by the unexpected confrontation. Patricia, Emma's mother, attempts to calm the situation, but David continues, expressing his deep hurt. David questions how Emma could betray him so profoundly, especially on their wedding day. The guests look on in shock, and whispers spread quickly, turning what was meant to be a joyous day into a scene of chaos and heartbreak. As emotions settle and guests start leaving, David finds himself in a conversation with a close friend, who hints that Patricia might have played a role in Emma's actions. Curious and hurt, David starts to dig deeper, speaking to a few family members who hint that Patricia never approved of his marriage to Emma. Patricia had always envisioned her daughter with someone more successful and had been vocal about her disapproval of David behind his back. David realizes that Patricia's behavior may not have been merely protective, but rather manipulative. As he investigates further, David uncovers messages between Patricia and Emma where Patricia subtly encouraged her daughter to keep in touch with Alex, telling Emma she deserves to be happy and shouldn't settle for less. David is horrified to realize that Patricia may have been the one pushing Emma back into Alex's arms, planting doubts about David to sabotage the marriage. Confronted with the truth, David confronts Emma in private, asking her about her mother's involvement in the affair. Emma, feeling trapped and ashamed, admits that Patricia had always influenced her decisions, and she had struggled to gain her independence. Emma explains that Patricia encouraged her to reconnect with Alex, even while she was dating David. Patricia would frequently bring up Alex, claiming he was the one that got away, and subtly insinuating that David was not good enough for her. Emma, feeling torn between her loyalty to her mother and her love for David, eventually gave in to her mother's influence. She apologizes to David, expressing regret for not standing up to Patricia and for allowing her doubts to ruin what they had. Emma's confession brings mixed emotions for David. He feels a tinge of sympathy but also anger for how easily she let her mother's manipulation jeopardize their relationship. David decides that Patricia's actions should not go unnoticed. He gathers his family, close friends, and Emma's relatives to reveal Patricia's role in their failed marriage. With the messages as proof, David exposes how Patricia actively encouraged Emma's affair, not only betraying him, but also her own daughter by undermining her happiness. The revelation sends shockwaves through both families. Patricia is confronted by her relatives who demand an explanation for her actions. Unrepentant, Patricia tries to justify her actions, claiming she only wanted the best for Emma. However, most of the family sees through her manipulation, and her actions lead to a fracture within her own family as relatives begin to distance themselves from her. With the wedding and relationship in ruins, David decides to leave Emma and cut ties with her family. While he understands the influence Patricia had over Emma, he realizes he cannot rebuild trust with someone who allowed such manipulation. Emma is devastated, but she begins to see the damage her mother's influence has caused in her life. Determined to change, Emma starts therapy to break free from her mother's control, hoping to reclaim her independence and self-worth. David, though deeply hurt, begins his own journey of healing. Supported by his family, especially his sister Clara, he finds solace in the strength he displayed by standing up for himself. Despite the pain of the betrayal, he looks forward to a future where he can find genuine love without interference or manipulation. In the final scene, David reflects on the entire experience, recognizing the importance of trust, respect, and autonomy in any relationship. He is hopeful that his story can serve as a lesson for others, that love should never come at the cost of one's self-respect, and that manipulation, no matter how subtle, should never be tolerated. Thank you so much for watching. We hope you found this story captivating and meaningful. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing for more stories. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, thank you again, and we'll see you in the next story.
Hey, and thanks for tuning in to Cheating Tales Lab. We've got another awesome story for you, and we hope you enjoy every moment. So, let's jump into the story and get things rolling. Jack Reeves fumbled with his keys, the exhaustion from his 36-hour shift making even this simple task a challenge. As the lock finally gave way, he stumbled into the quiet of his home. The silence was a stark contrast to the chaos of the emergency room he'd left behind. He leaned against the closed door, eyes shut, reliving the day's triumphs. Mrs. Johnson's heart transplant had been successful. Little Timmy would walk again after that nasty car accident. Jack allowed himself a small smile. Days like these made the long hours worth it. Opening his eyes, he surveyed the dim entryway. His gaze fell on his daughter's backpack, carelessly tossed on the floor. A fond sigh escaped his lips. "Emily," he muttered, shaking his head, "when will you learn to hang this up?" He bent to pick up the bag, wincing as his back protested the movement. As he lifted it, intending to hang it on its designated hook, a small leather-bound book slipped out and hit the floor with a soft thud. Jack froze, recognizing it instantly. Emily's diary. He stared at it, warring with himself. The scout law, ingrained in him since childhood, echoed in his mind. Trustworthy. Loyal. I shouldn't, he whispered to the empty house. Yet even as the words left his mouth, his hand was reaching for the book. Something nagged at him, a feeling he couldn't quite place. Call it doctor's intuition, but something felt off. With trembling fingers, He flipped open the diary. His eyes scanned the pages, not really reading at first, just taking in his daughter's neat handwriting. Then, a phrase caught his attention, making his blood run cold. And then second dad took me to the science fair. He was so proud when I won first place. I wish dad could have been there, but I know the hospital keeps him busy. Jack read the passage again and again. Each time, the words, second dad, seemed to grow larger, mocking him. What the hell? He muttered, his voice barely audible. His mind raced, flipping through possibilities. A grandfather? An uncle? But no, Emily would have used those terms. This was something else. Something deliberate. He turned more pages, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. More references to this mysterious figure leapt out at him. Second dad helped me with my math homework. Second dad took me for ice cream after my dentist appointment. Jack's hands were shaking now, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. How long had this been going on? How had he not noticed? The sound of a car pulling into the driveway snapped him back to reality. He snapped the diary shut, his decision made. No more secrets. No more lies. It was time for answers. Sarah's key turned in the lock, and Jack straightened, squaring his shoulders. The diary felt heavy in his hand, a damning piece of evidence. The door swung open, and Sarah walked in, her face brightening at the sight of him. Jack, you're home early, her smile faltered as she took in his expression, her eyes flicking to the diary in his hand. The color drained from her face. We need to talk, Jack said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. Sarah's bag slipped from her shoulder, hitting the floor with a thud. Jack, I can explain. Can you? Jack cut her off, his tone eerily calm. He held up the diary. Who is second dad? Sarah? Sarah's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. She looked like a fish out of water, gasping for air. What I think, Jack continued, his calm exterior belying the turmoil within, is that my daughter has been calling another man dad behind my back. What I think is that my wife has been lying to me. Am I wrong, Sarah? Sarah's shoulders slumped, defeat written in every line of her body. His name is Alan, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Dr. Alan Blackwood. He was my professor in college. Jack felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. The room spun around him, and he had to lean against the wall to steady himself. How long? He managed to ask, dreading the answer. Sarah's eyes met his, filled with a mixture of guilt and defiance. 10 years. The words hit Jack like a physical blow. A decade. A whole decade of lies and betrayal. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. What could he possibly say in the face of such a betrayal? Sarah took a step toward him, her hand outstretched. Jack, please, let me explain. It's not what you think. Jack jerked away from her touch as if it burned. Not what I think, he spat, his calm finally cracking. What exactly am I supposed to think, Sarah? That you've been having an innocent tea party with your old professor for the last 10 years? That you just happened to forget to mention it? Sarah flinched at his words. I never meant for it to go this far. It just happened. Happened. Jack's laugh was bitter. Things like this don't just happen, Sarah. You made a choice. Every time you met him, every time you lied to me, every time you let our daughter call him Dad, you made a choice. The sound of the front door opening again cut through the tension. Margaret, Jack's mother, walked in, her arms full of groceries. Her smile froze as she took in the scene before her. Jack? Sarah? What's going on? Margaret asked, her eyes darting between them. Jack turned to his mother, ready to explain, when he caught the flicker of guilt that crossed her face. His eyes narrowed. You knew, he said, his voice filled with disbelief and anger. Margaret set the groceries down, her hands trembling slightly. Jack, please let me explain. Explain what, Mom? Jack's voice rose, filling the small entryway. Explain that you've been covering for Sarah's affair? That you've been lying to me too? Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, unable to speak. Jack's laugh was hollow, devoid of any humor. How long have you known? I found out a few years ago, Margaret admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I kept quiet to protect the family. I thought if I ignored it, it might go away. Jack shook his head, disgust evident in his expression. Protect the family? By lying to me? By letting my daughter call another man dad? Sarah stepped forward, reaching out to Jack again. Please, Jack, let's talk about this. I know I've made mistakes, but we can work through this. For Emily's sake, if nothing else. Jack jerked away from her touch once more. Mistakes? A decade-long affair isn't a mistake, Sarah. It's a choice. A choice you made every single day for 10 years. He turned to Margaret. And you're supposed to be my mother. How could you keep this from me? Margaret's tears were flowing freely now. I'm so sorry, Jack. I thought I was doing the right thing. I didn't want to see our family torn apart. Well, congratulations, Mom, Jack said bitterly. You've succeeded spectacularly. Our family isn't torn apart. It's obliterated. With that, he pushed past them both, heading for the stairs. He needed to be alone, to process this betrayal that seemed to infect every aspect of his life. Jack, wait. Sarah called after him. Where are you going? We need to talk about this. Jack paused on the stairs, not turning back. I'm going to check on our daughter. The one person in this house who hasn't been lying to me for years. His voice was cold, detached. Don't follow me. I can't even look at either of you right now. As he climbed the stairs, he could hear Sarah's muffled sobs and his mother's attempts at consolation. But he felt nothing. The shock was too fresh, the betrayal too deep. He didn't know if he'd ever be able to feel anything for them again. In the days that followed, Jack's world crumbled around him. He threw himself into his work, performing back-to-back surgeries with laser-like focus. The operating room became his sanctuary, the one place where the chaos in his personal life couldn't touch him. His colleagues noticed the change in him. The usual warmth in his eyes was replaced by a steely determination. His easy smile was now a line of concentration, but they attributed it to his legendary dedication, not knowing the turmoil that lay beneath the surface. Dr. Thompson, the head of surgery, stopped him in the hallway after his third consecutive shift. Jack, you've been here for 72 hours straight. Go home, get some rest. Jack's smile didn't reach his eyes as he replied, I'm fine, sir. There's always more work to be done. Dr. Thompson frowned, concern etching lines on his forehead. Jack, I admire your dedication, but you're no good to your patients if you're exhausted. Take a break. That's an order. Jack nodded, knowing he couldn't argue. But the thought of going home filled him with dread. Home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a battlefield. As he drove home, his mind wandered to the confrontations that awaited him. Sarah had been trying to corner him for days, attempting to explain, to justify her actions. But how could anyone justify a decade of lies? He pulled into the driveway, steeling himself for what was to come. As soon as he stepped through the door, Sarah was there, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. Jack, please, she began, her voice hoarse. We need to talk about this. I know what I did was wrong, but you have to understand. Your work, you were always at the hospital. I felt so alone. Jack's eyes were cold as he looked at her. So you decided to sleep with your professor? To let him play daddy to our daughter? Tell me, Sarah, how exactly am I supposed to understand that? Sarah flinched at his words. I never meant for it to go this far. It just happened. Alan was there when you weren't. He listened, he cared. And I didn't? Jack interrupted, his voice rising. I was saving lives, Sarah. I was working to provide for our family. And all this time, you were, what? Playing happy families with your lover? Sarah's face crumpled. It wasn't like that, Jack. I love you. I've always loved you. Alan he was a mistake. A horrible, terrible mistake. Jack shook his head, disgust evident in his expression. A mistake is forgetting to buy milk, Sarah. A mistake is being late for a dinner reservation. What you did, that's not a mistake. That's a choice. A choice you made every day for 10 years. He pushed past her, heading for the stairs. He needed to see Emily, the one person in this house who hadn't betrayed him. He found Emily sitting alone in her room, her eyes red from crying. His heart broke at the sight. In all the chaos, he hadn't stopped to think how this was affecting her. Hey, sweetheart, he said softly, sitting next to her on the bed. How are you holding up? Emily's lower lip trembled. Is this my fault, Dad? Because I wrote about him in my diary? Jack pulled her into a tight hug, his own eyes stinging with unshed tears. No, absolutely not. None of this is your fault, Emily. You hear me? This is about choices that adults made, not you. Emily clung to him, her small body shaking with sobs. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to call him Dad, he said. He said it would make Mom happy. Jack's jaw clenched at her words, but he kept his voice gentle. You have nothing to be sorry for, Emily. You did nothing wrong. The adults in your life. We're the ones who messed up. But I promise you, we're going to fix this. Somehow. As Emily's sobs subsided, Jack felt a renewed sense of determination. He would get through this, for her sake if nothing else. He might not know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He would do whatever it took to protect his daughter from the fallout of this betrayal. That evening, as Jack sat in his study, trying to make sense of the chaos his life had become, his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but something told him to answer. Hello? Jack? This is Alan Blackwood. Jack's grip on the phone tightened, his knuckles turning white. The voice on the other end was smooth, almost condescending. It took every ounce of Jack's self-control not to hang up immediately. What do you want? He managed to grit out. I think it's time we discuss this situation like gentlemen, don't you? Blackwood's tone was infuriatingly calm, as if they were discussing nothing more consequential than the weather. Jack's jaw clenched so hard he thought his teeth might crack. Fine, he spat out. Name the time and place. As he hung up, Jack's mind was already formulating a plan. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Blackwood might think he had the upper hand, but Jack was just getting started. He would protect his daughter, salvage what was left of his family, and make sure Blackwood paid for his part in this betrayal. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges he never thought he'd have to face. But Jack Reeves was no stranger to adversity. He'd fought to save lives in the operating room, against impossible odds. Now, he would fight for his family, for his daughter, for his very sense of self. As he looked out the window at the setting sun, Jack felt a strange calm settle over him. The storm of emotions that had been raging inside him for days quieted, replaced by a steely resolve. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on. He was Dr. Jack Reeves, and he didn't back down from a fight. The ambulance sirens pierced the night, their urgent wails growing louder as they approached County General Hospital. Dr. Jack Reeves stood at the emergency room entrance, his face a mask of determination. The call had come in 15 minutes ago, a devastating multi-car pileup on the highway, multiple critical injuries. All hands on deck. As the first ambulance screeched to a halt, Jack's mind snapped into focus. The chaos of his personal life faded into the background. Here, in this moment, he was Dr. Reeves, trauma surgeon. Nothing else mattered. What have we got? Jack barked as the EMTs rushed the first stretcher towards him. Male, mid-30s, severe head trauma and possible internal bleeding. One of the EMTs rattled off. BP's dropping fast. Jack's hands were already moving, assessing the patient as they wheeled him inside. Get him 2 or 3. Page Dr. Sanderson for neuroconsult. Move. For the next several hours, Jack was a whirlwind of activity. He moved from one critical patient to another, barking orders, performing intricate surgeries, making split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death. In or two, elbow deep in a patient's chest cavity, Jack felt a bead of sweat trickle down his forehead. Suction, he commanded, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. We've got a bleeder here. As he worked to repair the torn aorta, Jack's mind flashed briefly to Sarah, to the betrayal that had shattered his world. He pushed the thought away, focusing on the task at hand. He couldn't save his marriage, but he could save this life. Hours blended together as Jack moved from one emergency to the next. He was vaguely aware of the nurses murmuring in awe at his stamina, his laser-like focus. Let them talk. This was what he was born to do. As the crisis began to subside, Jack stepped out of the OR, peeling off his bloody gloves. He rolled his shoulders, feeling the ache of exhaustion setting in. But there was no time to rest. More patients needed him. He was heading towards the next, or when he spotted a familiar figure in the hallway. His steps faltered as he recognized Dr. Alan Blackwood, the man who had been playing second dad to his daughter for years. Blackwood was standing with another doctor, engaged in what appeared to be a casual conversation, as if he hadn't torn apart a family, as if he had every right to be here. Their eyes met across the bustling ER. Blackwood's lips curled into a smirk, a look of smug superiority that made Jack's blood boil. Jack's hands clenched at his sides, the urge to wipe that smirk off Blackwood's face with his fist nearly overwhelming. For a moment, Jack saw red. He imagined striding across the room, grabbing Blackwood by his expensive collar and slamming him against the wall. He could almost feel the satisfying crunch of the man's nose breaking under his fist. But then a nurse's voice cut through his violent fantasy. "Dr. Reeves, we need you in or 4. It's critical." Jack blinked, the red haze receding. He took a deep breath, unclenching his fists. With a last, cold look at Blackwood, he turned and strode towards or 4. He had lives to save. Blackwood could wait. As Jack scrubbed in for yet another surgery, he forced himself to focus. Push away the anger, the betrayal, the hurt. Channel it all into saving lives. That's what he did best. That's what he could control. Hours later, as the sun began to peek over the horizon, Jack finally emerged from the OR. The crisis was over. They had lost 2 patients, but saved many more. It was a victory, albeit a bittersweet one. As he headed towards the locker room, dead on his feet, a voice called out to him. "Dr. Reeves? A word, please." Jack turned to see Dr. Harrison, the hospital administrator, beckoning him into his office. With a weary nod, Jack followed him in. "Remarkable work tonight, Jack," Dr. Harrison began, his tone grave despite the praise. "You saved a lot of lives." "Just doing my job," Jack replied, too tired for false modesty. "About that," Dr. Harrison continued, his expression turning grim. "I'm afraid I have some bad news. The board has decided that due to budget cuts, we need to eliminate 1 senior surgeon position." Jack felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. After everything he'd been through, after the hell of the past few days, now this? "I see," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "And I suppose I'm on the chopping block?" Dr. Harrison spread his hands in a helpless gesture. "Nothing's been decided yet, but I wanted to give you a heads up. The board will be reviewing all senior staff over the next week. I suggest you prepare to defend your position." Jack nodded, his mind already racing. He'd have to fight to keep his job, all while his personal life was in shambles. But he was Dr. Jack Reeves. He didn't back down from a fight. "Thank you for letting me know," he said, standing up. "If there's nothing else?" As he left Dr. Harrison's office, Jack's exhaustion was tinged with a new determination. He'd been backed into a corner, both personally and professionally, but he wasn't going down without a fight. Not by a long shot. The park was quiet in the early evening, the fading sunlight casting long shadows across the carefully manicured lawns. Jack Reeves sat on a bench, his posture rigid, eyes scanning the path. He checked his watch for the 3rd time in as many minutes. Blackwood was late. Typical. As if summoned by Jack's impatience, a figure appeared on the path. Dr. Alan Blackwood strolled towards the bench, his silver hair catching the last rays of sunlight. His walk was unhurried, almost leisurely, as if he were out for an evening constitutional rather than a confrontation. Jack's jaw clenched as Blackwood approached. The man's casual demeanor, his air of smug superiority, made Jack's blood boil. But he forced himself to remain seated, to maintain his outward calm. He wouldn't give Blackwood the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. "Jack, my boy," Blackwood said as he reached the bench, his tone infuriatingly patronizing. "So good of you to meet me here. Lovely evening, isn't it?" Jack didn't respond, merely gestured for Blackwood to sit. The older man lowered himself onto the bench, arranging his expensive coat around him with fastidious care. "Now then," Blackwood began, a condescending smile playing on his lips. "I think it's time we discuss this situation, like gentlemen. Don't you agree?" Jack remained silent, his eyes fixed on Blackwood's face. Let the bastard talk. Let him dig his own grave. Blackwood, seemingly unperturbed by Jack's silence, continued. I understand you're upset. It's a natural reaction. But I think, if you look at this objectively, you'll see that there's a way for all of us to benefit from this situation. Jack's eyebrow raised slightly, the only outward sign of his incredulity. Benefit? From his wife's infidelity? From the betrayal of his family? He was curious to see how Blackwood would spin this. You see, Blackwood went on, warming to his theme, Sarah and Emily. They need me. I've been a part of their lives for so long now. And you, Jack, well, let's be honest. Your work keeps you away so much. They need a stable presence in their lives. Jack's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white with the effort of restraining himself. But still, he said nothing. What I'm proposing, Blackwood said, leaning in conspiratorially, is an arrangement. I continue to see Sarah and Emily. I can be there for them when you can't. Think of it as a support system. For your family. The audacity of the suggestion nearly took Jack's breath away. For a moment, he was speechless with rage. But then, something shifted inside him. A cold, clear anger replaced the hot fury that had been burning in his chest. When Jack finally spoke, his voice was soft, but there was steel beneath the quiet tone. An arrangement, he repeated, as if tasting the word. That's an interesting proposal, Alan. May I call you Alan? Blackwood nodded, a look of relief crossing his face. He clearly thought Jack was coming around to his way of thinking. Let me counter with an arrangement of my own, Jack continued, his voice still dangerously soft. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk away. From Sarah, from Emily, from my family. You're going to disappear from our lives so completely it'll be like you never existed. Blackwood's smug smile faltered. Now, Jack, be reasonable. I'm not finished. Jack cut him off, his tone brooking no argument. If you don't, I will destroy you. I will report you to the University Ethics Board. I will provide evidence of your inappropriate relationship with a student. Yes, Alan, I have evidence. And I will ensure that your academic career ends in disgrace. The color drained from Blackwood's face as Jack laid out his plan in excruciating detail. The older man's arrogance crumbled, replaced by a look of dawning horror as he realized the precariousness of his position. You can't, Blackwood began, but Jack cut him off again. I can, and I will, unless you do exactly as I say. Blackwood's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. He looked like a fish out of water, gasping for air. But what about Sarah? What about Emily? Blackwood finally managed to sputter. They need me. Jack stood up, looming over the seated man. What they need, he said, his voice cold, is for you to disappear. You've done enough damage. It's time for you to go. With that, Jack turned and walked away, leaving Blackwood sputtering threats and pleas behind him. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew he'd won this round. As he strode out of the park, Jack felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time since discovering Sarah's betrayal, he felt in control. Blackwood had thought he held all the cards, but Jack had just shown him how wrong he was. Now, it was time to turn his attention to the next battle. His job at the hospital was on the line, and he'd be damned if he was going to lose that too. With renewed determination, Jack headed home to prepare for the fight ahead. The conference room was silent as Jack Reeves stepped up to the podium. The review board members sat in a semicircle before him, their faces impassive. Jack could feel the weight of their scrutiny, the unspoken pressure of what was at stake. He took a deep breath, centering himself. He'd spent the last week preparing for this moment, poring over hospital records, analyzing efficiency reports, crafting a plan that would not only save his job but revolutionize the ER. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, Jack began, his voice steady and confident. I stand before you today not just to defend my position, but to present a vision for the future of our emergency room. As Jack launched into his presentation, he could see the board members' expressions shift from polite interest to genuine engagement. He laid out his comprehensive plan to improve ER efficiency and reduce costs, his words painting a picture of a streamlined, cutting-edge emergency department that would set new standards in patient care. By implementing these changes, Jack continued, clicking through his meticulously prepared slides, we can reduce wait times by 30%, increase patient satisfaction by 25%, and most importantly, save more lives. He saw Dr. Harrison, the hospital administrator, lean forward, his brow furrowed in concentration. The other board members were scribbling notes, nodding along with Jack's points. As Jack neared the end of his presentation, he felt a surge of confidence. He'd given them something to think about, something that went beyond simply justifying his own position. He was offering them a way to transform the entire emergency department. In conclusion, Jack said, his voice ringing with conviction, I believe that by adopting these measures, we can not only weather the current budget crisis but emerge stronger, more efficient, and better equipped to serve our community. Thank you. As Jack finished speaking, a murmur of discussion broke out among the board members. Dr. Harrison opened his mouth, presumably to begin the questioning phase of the review, when suddenly, a shrill alarm cut through the air. Code blue in the ER. A voice announced over the intercom. Code blue in the ER. Without hesitation, Jack turned to the board. I apologize, but I'm needed downstairs. Lives are at stake. Before anyone could object, Jack was out the door, racing towards the emergency room. As he ran, he could hear footsteps behind him. The board members were following. Jack burst into the ER to find chaos. A patient on a gurney was convulsing, surrounded by frantic nurses. What's the situation? Jack barked, already moving towards the patient. Male, 50s, cardiac arrest, a nurse reported. We've been doing CPR for 10 minutes. No response. Jack's mind kicked into high gear, assessing the situation in seconds. Get me the defibrillator, he ordered. Already starting chest compressions. Push one of AP. As he worked, Jack was vaguely aware of the board members watching from the doorway, but his focus was entirely on the patient. Nothing else mattered. Clear. Jack called, applying the defibrillator paddles. The patient's body jerked with the shock, but the heart monitor continued its ominous flat line. Again, Jack commanded, resuming compressions. Come on, don't give up on me now. Minutes ticked by, feeling like hours. Jack's arms ached from the constant compressions, sweat beading on his forehead. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Clear, he called again, delivering another shock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, miraculously, a beep. Then another. The heart monitor sprang to life, showing a weak but steady rhythm. We've got a pulse, Jack announced, his voice hoarse with exertion and relief. Get him to the ICU, stat. As the nurses wheeled the patient away, Jack finally allowed himself to breathe. He turned to find the entire review board staring at him, their expressions a mix of awe and respect. Dr. Harrison stepped forward, a smile breaking across his usually stern face. Dr. Reeves, he said, I think we've seen all we need to see. Your position is safe. In fact, if you're amenable, we'd like to offer you the position of head of emergency surgery. Jack blinked, the words taking a moment to register through his post-adrenaline haze. Thank you, sir, he managed to say. I'd be honored. As the news spread through the hospital, Jack found himself surrounded by congratulating colleagues. Nurses patted him on the back. Fellow doctors shook his hand. In that moment, Jack felt a surge of pride and accomplishment that he hadn't experienced in a long time. But even as he accepted the congratulations, a part of Jack's mind was already moving forward. He had secured his professional future, yes, but there was still work to be done. His personal life was still in shambles, and he had no intention of letting Blackwood or Sarah off the hook. As he headed to his office to change out of his sweat-soaked scrubs, Jack's mind was already formulating his next move. He had won this battle, but the war was far from over, and Jack Reeves was just getting started. Jack Reeves sat in his dimly lit study, surrounded by stacks of papers and file folders. The soft glow of his laptop screen illuminated his face, casting shadows that accentuated the lines of exhaustion etched there. He rubbed his eyes, bleary from hours of poring over financial records and emails. It had been 3 weeks since his confrontation with Blackwood in the park. 3 weeks of sleepless nights and caffeine-fueled days. But Jack was nothing if not methodical. He would build his case brick by brick, leaving no stone unturned. He reached for his phone, dialing a number he'd come to know by heart. Daniel's Investigations, a gruff voice answered on the second ring. "It's Reeves," Jack said, his voice low. "Any updates?" "Yeah, Doc. Got some juicy stuff for you. Your wife and the professor met again yesterday. Got it all on camera this time." Jack's jaw clenched. Even after everything, even after he'd made it clear to Blackwood to stay away, they were still seeing each other. "Send me everything," he said, his tone clipped. As he hung up, Jack's eyes fell on a framed photo on his desk. It was from happier times. Him, Sarah, and Emily at the beach, all smiles and sunburned noses. He turned the framed face down with a heavy sigh. Turning back to his laptop, Jack pulled up the financial records he'd been combing through. Credit card statements, bank transfers, even receipts Sarah had carelessly left lying around. It was all there in black and white, years of misused family funds, funneled into supporting her affair with Blackwood. A hotel room here, an expensive dinner there. Gifts that Jack now realized were never for him. It made him sick to his stomach. But it wasn't just about the money. Jack had been reaching out to Blackwood's former students, carefully and discreetly. The pattern that emerged was disturbing. Blackwood had a history of inappropriate relationships with students, stretching back years. He'd just been clever enough to keep it quiet. Until now. A knock at the study door startled Jack from his thoughts. "Come in," he called, hastily minimizing the windows on his screen. Emily poked her head in, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Dad, can I talk to you?" Jack's heart clenched. In his laser focus on building his case, had he been neglecting his daughter? "Of course, sweetheart. Come here." Emily shuffled in, curling up in the armchair across from Jack's desk. She looked small, vulnerable. Jack waited patiently for her to speak. Is Mom coming back?" Emily finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack sighed. How could he explain this to a child? "I don't know, Emily. Your mom and we have a lot to work through." Emily nodded, picking at a loose thread on her pajama sleeve. And Dr. Blackwood? Is he going to be my dad now?" The question hit Jack like a physical blow. He was around the desk in an instant, kneeling in front of Emily and taking her small hands in his. "Listen to me, Emily. I am your dad. The only dad you need. No one, not Dr. Blackwood, not anyone, is ever going to change that. Do you understand?" Emily nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Jack pulled her into a tight hug, his own eyes stinging. As he held his daughter, he felt his resolve harden. He would see this through, not just for himself, but for Emily. Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed, Jack found himself staring at his phone again. He scrolled through his contacts, finger hovering over a name he hadn't called in years. Mike Hawkins, his oldest friend, a detective with the police department. Before he could talk himself out of it, Jack hit the call button. "Jack?" Mike's voice was surprised but warm. "It's been a while, buddy. Everything okay?" Jack took a deep breath. "Mike, I need your help. And I need a friend." Over the next hour, Jack poured out the whole sordid story. The affair, the betrayal, the evidence he'd been gathering. Mike listened in silence, only occasionally asking for clarification. When Jack finally finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Jesus, Jack," Mike finally said. "I had no idea. Why didn't you call me sooner?" "I don't know," Jack admitted. "Pride, maybe. Shame. I needed to handle it on my own." "Well, you're not alone anymore," Mike said firmly. "Listen, what you're doing, building this case, it's smart. But you need to be careful. This Blackwood guy sounds like a real piece of work. And if he's as connected as you say, he could be dangerous." Jack nodded, even though Mike couldn't see him. "I know. That's why I called you. I need advice, Mike. Legal advice, sure, but I also need to know I'm not crazy. That I'm doing the right thing here." "You're not crazy, Jack," Mike assured him. "And from where I'm sitting, you're handling this about as well as anyone could. But listen, you need to be prepared for how ugly this could get. Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Jack's eyes fell on the face-down photo frame. For a moment, he saw Emily's tear-stained face in his mind. His jaw set. "I'm sure," he said. I have to see this through. For Emily's sake, if nothing else. All right, Mike said. Then let's do this right. Here's what you need to do. As Mike laid out a plan of action, Jack felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He wasn't alone in this fight anymore. And with Mike's help, he would make sure that Blackwood and Sarah faced the consequences of their actions. The game was far from over, but Jack Reeves was finally ready to make his move. The conference room at the Hilton was uncomfortably quiet. Jack Reeves sat at the head of the long table, his face an impassive mask. To his right sat Mike Hawkins, a thick folder in front of him. Across from them, Sarah fidgeted nervously, her eyes darting between Jack and the door. The tension in the room ratcheted up a notch as the door opened. Alan Blackwood strode in, his silver hair immaculately styled, a confident smile on his face. That smile faltered as he took in the scene before him. What's going on here? Blackwood demanded, his eyes narrowing as he spotted Mike. Who's this? Please, have a seat, Alan, Jack said, his voice eerily calm. All will be explained shortly. As if on cue, the door opened again. A distinguished-looking man in his 60s entered, followed by a woman about Blackwood's age and a sharp-eyed man in an expensive suit. Dean Hartley, Jack said, nodding to the older man. Mrs. Blackwood, Mr. Thompson. Thank you all for coming. Please, be seated. Blackwood's face had gone pale. Jack, what is the meaning of this? He sputtered. Jack leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. We're here to work things out, Alan. Isn't that what you wanted? To discuss our arrangement? Sarah's head snapped up at that, her eyes wide with panic. Alan, what is he talking about? Jack didn't give Blackwood a chance to respond. Let me explain, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the room. For the past decade, my wife Sarah has been carrying on an affair with Dr. Blackwood here. An affair that began when Sarah was his student. Dean Hartley's bushy eyebrows shot up. Mrs. Blackwood let out a small gasp. That's preposterous, Blackwood blustered. You have no proof. Oh, but I do. Jack cut him off smoothly. He nodded to Mike, who began laying out photos on the table. Photos of Sarah and Blackwood together, in various compromising positions. Hotel receipts, bank statements, financial records showing how my wife has been funneling our family's money to support this affair, Jack continued, his voice never rising above a conversational tone, and statements from several of Dr. Blackwood's former students, detailing a pattern of inappropriate relationships stretching back years. The color had drained from Blackwood's face. Sarah was openly weeping now, her head in her hands. This is a setup, Blackwood tried, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Jack asked mildly. He turned to Dean Hartley. Dean, I believe you'll find all the evidence you need here to conduct a full ethics inquiry. Mr. Thompson can advise you on the legal implications. The lawyer nodded, already leafing through the documents with a grim expression. Alan, Mrs. Blackwood spoke up, her voice trembling. Is this true? All of it. Blackwood opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. Margaret, I can explain. But Jack wasn't done. Oh, there's more, he said, his eyes glinting. Sarah, would you like to explain to everyone how you've been embezzling funds from your research grant to pay for your little rendezvous? Sarah's head snapped up, her tear-streaked face a mask of horror. Jack, please, she begged. Don't do this. Do what, Sarah? Jack asked, his calm facade finally cracking. Tell the truth? Isn't that what you should have done years ago? The room descended into chaos. Blackwood and Sarah began shouting accusations at each other, their masks of civility finally shattering. Mrs. Blackwood dissolved into tears. Dean Hartley and Mr. Thompson huddled together, speaking in urgent whispers as they pored over the evidence. Through it all, Jack sat silent, watching the destruction he'd wrought. He felt no joy, no satisfaction, just a bone-deep weariness and a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, this nightmare was finally coming to an end. As the shouting reached a fever pitch, Mike leaned over to Jack. You okay, buddy? He asked quietly. Jack nodded, his eyes never leaving the scene before him. I will be, he said. Let's finish this. With that, Jack stood, silencing the room with his presence. I think we're done here, he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Dean Hartley, Mr. Thompson, I trust you have what you need. Mrs. Blackwood, I'm sorry you had to find out this way. Sarah, he paused, meeting his wife's tear-filled eyes. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce proceedings. Without another word, Jack turned and walked out of the room, Mike close behind him. As the door closed, he could hear the chaos erupting again behind him. But for the first time in months, Jack felt a sense of peace. The trap had been sprung. Now, all that was left was to deal with the aftermath. The university auditorium was packed, a low murmur of voices filling the air. At the front, a panel of stern-faced administrators sat behind a long table, and in the center, looking small and defeated, sat Dr. Alan Blackwood. Jack Reeves watched from the back of the room, his face impassive. He debated whether to attend this ethics inquiry at all, but in the end, he felt he needed to see it through. To witness the final act of this sordid drama, the head of the ethics committee, a severe-looking woman with steel-gray hair, called the room to order. Dr. Blackwood, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed auditorium. You stand accused of multiple ethical violations, including inappropriate relationships with students and misuse of university resources. How do you plead? Blackwood, his once proud shoulders now slumped, barely raised his head. I cannot deny the charges, he said, his voice barely audible. A collective gasp went through the room. Jack felt a grim satisfaction. Blackwood had finally run out of lies. What followed was a thorough and damning presentation of evidence. Emails, witness statements, financial records. With each new revelation, Blackwood seemed to shrink further into himself. When it was over, the verdict was swift and unequivocal. Blackwood's tenure was revoked. His academic career lay in tatters. As security escorted him from the room, his eyes met Jack's for a brief moment. There was no anger there, no defiance, just a haunted, empty look that almost made Jack pity him. Almost. As Jack left the auditorium, his phone buzzed. A text from Mike. It's done. Sarah's out. Jack allowed himself a small smile. Sarah's own ethics inquiry at her research institute had concluded. Like Blackwood, she'd been found guilty of ethical violations and financial misconduct. Her career as a researcher was over. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings and court appearances. Jack's lawyer, armed with the mountain of evidence he'd gathered, presented an ironclad case for divorce. Sarah, her fight gone, barely contested it. The final hearing was mercifully brief. As the judge delivered her ruling, Jack felt a weight he'd been carrying for months finally lift from his shoulders. In light of the evidence presented, the judge said, her tone grave, this court grants the petition for divorce. Furthermore, given the extent of Mrs. Reeves' infidelity and financial misconduct, the court awards full custody of the minor child, Emily Reeves, to Dr. Jack Reeves. Sarah let out a choked sob from across the courtroom, but Jack didn't look at her. His thoughts were only of Emily, of the future they would build together. As he left the courthouse, Jack was surprised to find a small crowd of reporters waiting. Word of the scandal had spread, it seemed. Dr. Reeves, one called out, how do you feel about the verdict? Jack paused, considering his words carefully. I'm grateful that justice has been served, he said finally. But more than that, I'm looking forward to moving on with my life and focusing on what really matters, my daughter. Another reporter pushed forward. There are rumors that the hospital wants you to join their ethics committee. Any comment? Jack blinked, taken aback. This was the first he'd heard of it. But as he thought about it, a slow smile spread across his face. If that's true, he said, I'd be honored. After everything that's happened, I think ensuring ethical behavior in our institutions is more important than ever. As the reporters clamored for more, Jack politely excused himself. He had somewhere more important to be. An hour later, Jack stood in the driveway of a modest suburban home, Emily's small hand clasped in his. A sold sign swung gently in the breeze. Well, what do you think? Jack asked, looking down at his daughter. Is this going to be a good new home for us? Emily looked up at him, a tentative smile on her face. It's nice, she said. But it's going to be different, isn't it? Without Mom? Jack knelt down, bringing himself to Emily's eye level. It is going to be different, he admitted. But different doesn't have to mean bad. We're going to make this our home, you and me. And I promise you, Emily, I'm going to be here for you. Always. Emily's smile grew a little stronger. I know, Dad, she said. Then, unexpectedly, she threw her arms around Jack's neck in a fierce hug. You're the only dad I need, she whispered. Jack hugged her back just as tightly, feeling the sting of tears in his eyes. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope, of healing. As they broke apart, Jack stood and ruffled Emily's hair. Come on, he said, fishing the new house keys out of his pocket. Let's go check out your new room. Hand in hand, father and daughter walked up the path to their new home. Behind them, the sun was setting, painting the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks. It was, Jack thought, a fitting end to this chapter of their lives. And as he opened the door to their new home, Jack Reeves felt ready, at last, to begin writing the next one.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.